She was known in the village as the Barefoot Girl, though her name was whispered less often than the mockery tied to her lack of shoes. She walked lightly over soil, stone, and grass as though each step was a song, and though her feet bore no sandals, there was a quiet dignity in her stride. Her life was humble, marked not by wealth or possessions but by an inner grace that shone in her every movement. She was not barefoot simply because she could not afford shoes, though her family had little. She was barefoot because she felt the earth, listened to it, and carried its rhythm in her veins. When she stood upon the ground, it seemed she belonged to it as much as the trees, rivers, and winds. Children followed her often, wide-eyed with admiration. They loved how she could leap with ease, spin in circles, and land with a grace that looked like flowing water made flesh. They clapped their small hands and tried to mimic her, stumbling and laughing while she encouraged them with warmth. To them, she was magical, someone who could turn the simplest gesture into something beautiful. The little ones never thought of her as poor or strange. They only saw her lightness, her joy, and the way she could dance without needing drums, for her body itself became music. But not all eyes in the village looked upon her with kindness. Among the elders and many adults, sneers followed wherever she went. They would point at her feet, caked with dust or smeared with mud after the rains, and shake their heads in disapproval. They whispered of carelessness, of shame, and of a girl who could not hold her head high because she lacked the basic dignity of shoes. Some said she was cursed, that any girl who refused to protect her feet must be touched by something unnatural. Others claimed she was simply stubborn, using her bare soles as a way to invite attention, as if humility and grace could ever be turned into vanity. The whispers were often loud enough for her to hear. She bore them silently, though her heart tightened with every passing insult. She did not seek to be greater than anyone else, she only wished to live in harmony with the world she loved. But the world of people was harsher than the world of soil and stone. Where the earth accepted her steps, people rejected her presence. Where the ground embraced her, the villagers cast her aside with mockery. In truth, there was more to her barefootedness than any of them could understand. When she walked through the fields, she felt the hum of life beneath her. When she stood by the riverbank, she felt the shifting pulse of water. When she danced, it was not merely for beauty or attention. It was communion, a way to give thanks to the unseen forces that cradled the world. Her mother once told her, before she passed away, that their line of women had always been close to the earth, that some gifts could not be explained but were meant to be cherished. She remembered those words, clinging to them when the cruelty of others pressed too heavily upon her. On market days, when the village gathered in the square, her lack of shoes always became the easiest target for scorn. Groups of women gossiped in the shadows of the stalls, pretending to pity her while dripping venom with every word. Young men laughed openly, pointing at her calloused feet and boasting that no husband would want a girl too poor to wear sandals. Yet still she held her head high even when her cheeks burned. She knew that lowering her gaze would give them the victory they sought, so she kept her eyes forward, though each laugh carved invisible wounds across her heart. The children who loved her often tried to defend her. She dances better than anyone else, they would say, their little voices strong. She is more graceful than the elders who scold her. But children's voices rarely changed adult minds. Their laughter was dismissed as naive, their loyalty brushed aside as foolish. To the villagers, the barefoot girl was less a child of beauty and more a blemish upon their pride. Yet despite the cruelty, she did not abandon her ways. Each evening, when the sun dipped low and the fields turned gold, she walked barefoot to the edges of the village where silence reigned. There she would press her feet into the soil, close her eyes and breathe deeply as if the ground itself filled her with strength. She carried a secret that none of them knew, that every insult hurled at her was absorbed by the earth beneath her feet, and every tear shed alone at night was swallowed by the soil that loved her back. Though she seemed delicate, almost fragile, she bore more strength than anyone realized. Her humility made her gentle, her grace made her admired by the innocent, and her bond with the earth gave her a resilience few could ever imagine. In the quiet moments, when her toes curled into the dirt and her heart found rhythm in the beating of the ground, she knew that though the people of the village might scorn her, the earth never would. It was in those moments of solitude and stillness that her story truly began, not with shoes she lacked, not with laughter that haunted her steps, but with the secret she held, that her barefoot dance was more than defiance or poverty. It was destiny waiting beneath the soil, waiting to rise when the time came. The laughter began softly, like the rustling of dry leaves in the evening wind, but soon it swelled into a chorus that echoed across the village square. At first, it was the children of envious mothers who pointed at her feet and giggled, repeating words they had overheard in their homes. Then the grown men joined in, their voices sharper, their laughter tinged with a cruelty born of arrogance. Women too whispered behind woven fans, their eyes flashing with contempt as they looked her up and down. She stood in the center of the gathering, her feet bare upon the packed earth as she always walked, unashamed yet quietly wounded. They mocked her for what she considered her bond to the land, but in their eyes it was proof of her lowliness, her lack of worth, her place far beneath them. They called her names in the open, letting the insults sting like whips. The earth girl, they sneered. Too poor for sandals. Too low to deserve them. Some went further, whispering that she carried bad luck because she let the ground drink from her flesh with every step. They said her feet would stain the soil, that she was unfit to join the proud women of the village who wore jewelry on their ankles and soft, bright sandals crafted by skilled hands. At festivals, when she entered, people's eyes would fall instantly upon her bare toes, cracked from sun and soil, and their lips curled in derision before she could even smile. It was not true poverty that kept her barefoot. She could have fashioned something simple for her feet if she wished. But she loved the feeling of the earth's breath rising through the soil, the way it spoke to her with warmth in the mornings and coolness at night. She loved the whispers of grass brushing her skin, the grounding of her spirit in every step. This bond was something no one around her understood, and so they turned it into a weapon against her. The elders, who should have known better, also allowed the mockery to continue. They shook their heads when they saw her and muttered words about shame. She dishonors her family, they would say, for a girl who cannot even cover her feet cannot carry dignity into womanhood. The young men, eager to appear clever, turned her presence into a joke. When she passed by, they stamped their own feet on the ground, laughing that the earth itself would crack beneath her dirty toes. And yet, in private moments, some among them marveled at her quiet grace, though they dared not admit it. Her dance, so natural and free, was another source of ridicule. Whenever she moved with rhythm, flowing like water, some would clap mockingly, imitating her steps in exaggeration. They claimed she danced only because she had no sandals to weigh her down, that her movements were the wild, unrefined gestures of someone without upbringing. But the truth was, when she danced, the earth responded. The dust lifted softly beneath her, the ground seemed to hum in rhythm, and even the trees swayed as though caught in her song. Still, the villagers saw only what they wished to see, an outcast, a girl unworthy of respect. The cruelty did not come in moments alone but lingered like a shadow. She felt it in the way some mothers pulled their children closer when she walked by, whispering that they should not follow her example. She heard it in the boys' laughter as they dared each other to place their sandals beside her feet in the dirt, mocking the difference. At feasts, when plates were passed around, someone would always find a way to say, "Don't drop food to the ground or she will eat it with her toes." The laughter that followed was loud, vicious, and she would sit silently, her chest burning with humiliation. Yet through it all, she carried herself with quiet dignity. She did not raise her voice against them, nor did she shed tears where they could see. Instead, she smiled softly, though inside she wondered why kindness always seemed weaker than cruelty in the eyes of others. The children, who once admired her for her gentle ways and the songs she sang, began to mirror their parents, hiding their admiration and joining in the mockery to avoid standing out. She lost even their open love, though their eyes still followed her with secret awe. Every day the words carved scars deeper into her spirit. The villagers thought little of it, believing their laughter harmless, even justified. But cruelty has a way of planting seeds that no one expects to grow. In mocking her bond with the earth, they awakened something ancient beneath their feet, something patient, watching and waiting. And though she did not yet realize it, her silence, her endurance, her unbroken spirit were slowly weaving into the ground itself, preparing for a day when the earth would no longer allow their laughter to go unanswered. Her smile was her shield. To those who jeered at her bare feet and scoffed at her presence, it looked as if their words slid past her, leaving no wound. Her lips curved upward, her eyes softened with a calm that betrayed nothing of the storm within. She walked through the village with steady steps, never lowering her gaze, never flinching when the taunts came. To the villagers she seemed untouchable, as though she truly did not care. But when the sun dipped low and the voices of the crowd faded into the quiet hum of night, her smile would fall away, and her silence was filled with tears. Her tears came quietly, never loud, never visible to others. In the solitude of her small hut, or sitting beneath the broad shade of the baobab tree where the moonlight touched the earth, she let them flow. Each tear burned, carrying with it the weight of humiliation, of rejection, of being seen as less than human by those who should have been her kin. She did not weep only for herself, but for the cruelty of hearts that delighted in the pain of another. She wept because she wondered what she had done to deserve such scorn, when all she had ever offered the world was gentleness. Sometimes she pressed her palms to her face, ashamed of her own sadness. "Why do I let them pierce me so deeply?" she would whisper into the night. "Why can I not be stronger as they expect me to be?" But the more she asked, the heavier her heart grew, for she knew that no strength could erase the sting of being treated as though she were beneath everyone else. Her pain was not weakness, it was the cry of a soul yearning to be seen for what it truly was. Her nights were the hardest. In the quiet, the mocking words returned, echoing as if the darkness itself repeated them. She could still hear the laughter, sharp and cruel, echoing from the square. She could still feel the eyes that had followed her every step, judging, dismissing. She lay on her mat, her feet bare against the cool earth, and thought about how those same feet had become her shame. They were her gift, her way of touching the land, yet others turned them into her wound. She wept until her chest hurt, until she could no longer breathe without trembling. There were moments she wished she could vanish, disappear into the forest and never return. She thought about running away, far from the eyes that watched only to mock. Yet each time she imagined it, her heart clenched. The earth beneath her seemed to murmur in protest, reminding her that her place was here, no matter the cruelty she faced. The soil beneath her feet felt like a comfort, whispering that she was not as alone as she believed. Still, the loneliness pressed against her ribs, and her tears fell silently into the dirt, soaking into the very ground that held her sorrow. The children's laughter cut her most deeply. Once, their eyes had shone with admiration when she danced or sang. Once, they had gathered around her to hear her stories and follow her into the fields. But now, they mimicked their parents, jeering at her bare feet, repeating the venom of their elders as if it were truth. She would smile at them still, offering kindness in return for their cruelty, but later, in the solitude of the night, she would cry for the innocence lost to them, for the love they once gave her so freely but now buried under shame. Her tears were not only for the mockery but for the longing in her heart. She longed to belong, to be seen not as strange or lowly but as part of the whole. She longed for someone to look past her bare feet and notice the way her laughter carried warmth, the way her hands healed small wounds, the way her dance mirrored the heartbeat of the land. She longed for a companion who would not laugh but walk beside her, barefoot too, in shared reverence for the earth. Yet in her reality she walked alone, smiling at faces that turned away, hiding tears that no one ever saw. The moon was her witness. On nights when her sorrow grew too heavy, she walked outside, her face tilted upward, tears glistening on her cheeks. She spoke to the moon softly as though it were her only friend. "Do you see me?" she would ask. "Do you know me? Or am I as invisible to you as I am to them?" The moon never answered in words, but its light fell on her gently, wrapping her in a silver glow that soothed the ache in her chest. Sometimes she thought it was listening, that it alone carried her secrets when no one else cared. And so she carried two selves. The smiling girl who walked in daylight, graceful even under the weight of mockery, and the weeping girl who broke each night in silence. The villagers never saw the second self. They never knew how their laughter cut her, how their words bruised her spirit. They thought her indifferent, untouched, perhaps even arrogant in her quietness. They did not see the way she hid her sorrow like a treasure, because to reveal it would be to give them yet another reason to laugh. Her silent tears became the river of her soul, hidden, deep, but powerful. And though she did not yet know it, those tears were not wasted. They were seeping into the earth, nourishing something ancient, something that would one day rise with her. When the village finally fell silent, when the fires dimmed to glowing embers and the laughter of those who mocked her faded into snores, she would step outside into the embrace of night. The stars above shimmered like countless eyes, their quiet gaze softer than the eyes of any villager, and the earth beneath her bare feet felt alive, pulsing with warmth that no one else seemed to notice. Alone in this secret hour, she gave herself to the one thing that had never betrayed her, her dance. Her feet pressed into the soil, not as something beneath her but as something she belonged to. Each step was gentle, deliberate, her toes curling into the dirt, her soles drawing strength from the land itself. She moved slowly at first, swaying with the whisper of the night breeze, her body bending and stretching as though in prayer. Then little by little, her rhythm grew, carrying not just the pain of her hidden tears but also the beauty of her spirit. Every turn of her body was both release and confession, every motion a language the earth understood though no human ever did. She danced for no audience but the stars and the moon. There was no ridicule here, no cruel laughter, no voices mocking her feet. Here her steps were not a shame but a song. The earth seemed to hum beneath her, responding to her movements with subtle vibrations, as though the ground itself was listening. When she spun, the air circled with her, carrying the scent of soil, grass, and distant blossoms. When she leapt lightly, her shadow rose with her, stretched long under the pale silver glow of the moon. Her dance carried the weight of everything she could never say. It told of the sting of their laughter, of the loneliness that pressed against her ribs, of the silent tears she poured into the soil. It told of her longing to be seen, not as lowly, not as strange, but as someone whose spirit moved like the wind, whose heart beat in rhythm with the earth. The dance was her secret language, her way of unburdening herself without words, her way of being free in a world that caged her in shame. There were moments when she forgot herself entirely. Her body moved with a force beyond her, as though the earth itself was guiding her steps. She tilted her head back, arms raised toward the stars, and her movements became less her own and more like a communion with something ancient. The ground beneath her felt warmer, softer, almost like it was alive. Each step sank deeper into the soil, not crushing it, but joining with it as though her spirit and the land were one. Sometimes, in the height of her secret dance, she imagined the mockers watching her, not to jeer but to see what she truly was. She imagined their mouths silenced by awe, their eyes wide not with cruelty but wonder. In her mind, they understood then, as her body moved in graceful rhythm, that her bare feet were not marks of shame but roots connecting her to something they could never touch. But when her dance slowed and the fantasy faded, she would only sigh and let the night carry her longing. The stars seemed to shimmer brighter when she danced. The moon hung lower, casting its light more generously upon her, as though honoring her with its glow. Sometimes she thought she heard whispers in the wind, not the cruel laughter of villagers but gentle voices, encouraging her, telling her she was not wrong to be who she was. These whispers sank into her soul, and though they never erased her sorrow, they reminded her of her strength. When she finally grew tired, her body damp with the sheen of effort, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths, she would sink to the earth and press her palms flat to the soil. The ground felt warm beneath her, as though it had taken her pain and turned it into something sacred. She closed her eyes then, letting the silence of the night wash over her. Though her heart still ached, there was a kind of peace that only these dances could give. And so it became her ritual. Night after night, when the world turned away from her, she met the earth in secret and danced. Each step carried sorrow, but each step also carried beauty. What she did not yet know was that the ground was listening more deeply than she realized. Her rhythm was leaving marks, invisible now but gathering strength. Her pain, her longing, her secret joy, all of it was seeping into the earth with every movement. She thought she was dancing only to soothe herself, but in truth she was planting seeds of power. Her nightly dances had always been a secret between her, the stars, and the silent earth, but something began to change. It started so subtly that she thought at first it was her imagination. The ground seemed warmer, more alive beneath her steps. Each movement carried a weight that had not been there before, as if her bare feet were awakening something slumbering in the soil. She lifted her arms to the moon, twirled lightly, and when her heel struck the earth, a faint tremor ran through the ground. She froze, heart racing, her breath caught in her throat. The night was still, yet the air carried an unspoken warning. The tremor faded quickly, but she could not shake the sense that the earth had stirred. Slowly, hesitantly, she continued. This time when her soles pressed deep into the dirt, the vibration returned, stronger, almost like a heartbeat responding to hers. The rhythm between her and the land became undeniable. She moved with caution at first, but her sorrow urged her forward. Her steps quickened, her spins grew bolder, and the tremors followed her, each one deeper than the last, as though the earth was echoing her grief, amplifying it into something vast and ancient. The forest animals began to notice. Where once crickets chirped and owls called, silence now fell when she danced. Small creatures froze in the underbrush, their eyes reflecting the moonlight, watching her in stillness as though they too felt the change. Even the wind seemed to hesitate, no longer playful but heavy, pressing down around her with unseen weight. It was as if the night itself was holding its breath, waiting for what her feet might summon next. When she leapt, the ground shuddered. When she landed, the soil shifted, small cracks spreading like veins beneath her toes. She gasped and stumbled back, staring down at the marks left in the earth. Fear and wonder tangled in her chest. Had she done this? She pressed her palm to the ground, and though it was cool on the surface, there was a pulsing warmth deeper below, like embers waiting to ignite. Her sorrow returned in a rush. Memories of the villagers' laughter, of their mocking eyes fixed on her feet, clawed at her heart. Without thinking, she poured those emotions into her movements, and the ground roared softly in response. Dust lifted into the air, shimmering faintly in the moonlight, swirling around her body as though caught in her rhythm. Her dance was no longer just for herself, it was becoming something far greater. Above her, the stars flickered strangely as though wincing from the vibrations. The moon glowed brighter, casting a silver halo upon her as if to sanctify what was unfolding. Her body ached, not from fatigue but from the raw energy coursing through her. She could feel the pulse of the earth in her bones, in her blood, in the very air she breathed. She was no longer alone in her grief, the land itself had joined her sorrow. The animals were the first to retreat. Birds rustled in their nests, wings flapping as they fled into the dark sky. The underbrush quivered with the scurry of creatures abandoning their shelters, unwilling to remain near the girl whose dance carried the weight of tremors. Even the tall trees groaned faintly, their branches swaying though no breeze touched them, their roots responding to the restless soil beneath. And then there was the air. It thickened, becoming heavy as though infused with power. She felt it clinging to her skin, pressing against her chest, humming in her ears. Each breath came deeper, more labored, but she did not stop. The heaviness was not crushing her, it was empowering her. The rhythm between her body and the earth had grown undeniable, each strike of her heel answered by the low rumble of ground beneath. A final spin carried her forward, and when her foot slammed down, the soil split in a jagged crack, thin but undeniable. She stumbled, gasped, and stared at the fissure stretching away from her toes. Her heart pounded. She should have been terrified, yet an odd calm spread through her, like recognition. The earth had not betrayed her, it had answered her. In that moment she understood what the villagers never could. Her bare feet, which they mocked as symbols of shame, were keys. Keys that unlocked a bond they could not imagine, a bond that tied her not just to the soil but to the very heartbeat of the world. She pressed her foot once more into the ground, softly, almost reverently, and the earth sighed beneath her like a living thing. Night after night, the pattern deepened. Each time she danced, the tremors grew more pronounced, the air heavier, the silence thicker. The earth was no longer a passive partner in her secret ritual, it was waking, stirred by her sorrow, her beauty, and her pain. And though she still carried her grief, it no longer felt like a burden she bore alone. She was becoming something more, something vast, something the village would never see coming. The festival came with noise, color, and celebration. The villagers filled the square with drums and flutes, laughter echoing into the air as food and drink flowed freely. Lanterns hung from poles, casting long shadows across the dusty ground where dances and contests were held. For most it was a time of joy, but for her, it was a reminder of her place among them. The barefoot girl, the one they mocked and ridiculed, the one they could never allow to forget her shame. When she walked into the square, some of the younger children smiled and reached for her hand, but their parents pulled them away, whispering cruel words under their breath. A group of youths called out to her, pretending to stumble, exaggerating their steps as if their bare feet burned on the ground. Laughter erupted, sharp and cutting, and she felt her cheeks flush. She lowered her gaze, her feet sinking into the soil, as though the earth alone could offer comfort. The elders, seated at the head of the gathering, watched her with disdain. One of them, with a voice loud enough to draw silence, declared, "If her feet are so proud of the dirt, let her show us what they can do. Let her dance for us, since she loves the ground more than shoes." The words carried weight, and the crowd roared with laughter and clapping. She froze. To dance before them, not out of joy but mockery, was humiliation deeper than words. Yet when she looked around, every eye was fixed on her. Some sneered, some smirked, others simply waited with cruel anticipation. Her body trembled, her lips pressed tightly together, but then her gaze drifted upward, to the moon rising pale in the distance, and a calmness spread through her chest. They wanted her to dance for their entertainment, to make her into a jest. But as she stepped into the circle, something within her stirred. Their laughter was not only cruelty, it was fuel. Every jeer, every mocking clap, every insult pressed into her like fire, and instead of breaking her, it kindled the rhythm that had been growing inside her for so long. The drummers began to beat their hands against the hides, quick, playful rhythms meant to amuse. The crowd shouted and cheered, urging her on. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the pulse beneath her soles, the warmth of the earth waiting just below. When she opened them again, her expression had changed. She no longer looked like a girl standing in shame but like someone holding a secret. Her first steps were soft, light, almost hesitant. She let them laugh, let them point, let them shake their heads. Then she turned, spun, and let her foot strike the ground harder than before. A jolt rushed through her body. She felt it, subtle, deep but present, the tremor beneath her skin rising from the soil itself. The villagers clapped and hollered, taking her movement as mere performance. They saw grace, rhythm, beauty, but they did not see the ground quivering faintly under her feet. She heard their laughter, sharp as knives, but instead of cutting her, it merged into the rhythm, becoming part of the song her body carried. Her steps quickened. Dust rose around her ankles, swirling as though drawn into the motion. She bent low, spun again, her hair flying, her feet pressing deeper into the earth. The drummers tried to keep pace, pounding faster, but it was no longer their rhythm she followed. It was something deeper, something older, something rising through the ground beneath her. The laughter began to shift. Some clapped louder, thinking she was performing brilliantly. Others fell quieter, sensing something strange in the way her body moved, the way the air felt heavier, the way their own chests seemed to vibrate faintly with every strike of her heel. She could feel it clearly now, the energy beneath the surface, restless and alive, answering her every step. The jeers that had once wounded her heart were gone, replaced by a calm fire burning within her. She no longer danced for them. She danced with the earth, and the earth was listening. As she leapt into the air and landed with both feet striking hard into the soil, a ripple shivered outward. Plates rattled on the festival tables. A jug tipped and shattered. The drummers faltered, startled by the faint shake beneath their seats. A hush rippled across part of the crowd, but others laughed nervously, dismissing it as coincidence. She did not stop. Her sorrow, her pain, her humiliation, all of it poured into her dance. Her body moved with grace, but also with weight, each strike a demand, each turn a cry. And with each movement, the ground beneath her answered more boldly. By the time she slowed, the air was thick with unease. The villagers clapped, some still jeering, but there was a tension now, a sense that they had watched something more than entertainment. She stood in the center of the circle, chest rising and falling, her feet coated in dust, her eyes shimmering with quiet power. She had danced because they demanded it, but it was no longer their laughter that defined her. It was the rhythm of the earth, and it had only just begun to awaken. Under the golden lantern strung high above the village square, the crowd gathered with eager eyes. They had expected mockery, a spectacle of humiliation that would feed their sense of superiority. But what they witnessed instead was transformation. The barefoot girl, once the subject of their scorn, stood at the center with a fire in her gaze that none had seen before. Her chest rose and fell with steady rhythm as though she carried within her the heartbeat of something greater than herself. The drums began their mocking beat, meant to force her into a dance of shame, but she lifted her chin and embraced the rhythm as though it belonged to her. Her first steps were soft, almost hesitant, as her feet pressed into the ground with careful grace. But as the laughter around her rose, something shifted within her. She no longer danced to appease or to escape ridicule. She danced for herself, for the bond she carried with the soil, for the quiet power that had always hummed beneath her soles. Each movement became sharper, quicker, more alive. The ground beneath her began to thrum with an energy that unsettled the onlookers. The laughter faltered, replaced by murmurs of unease as dust stirred in faint spirals around her feet. The girl's arms extended like branches reaching for the heavens, her body a vessel through which the earth spoke. Her bare feet struck the soil harder now, and the vibrations grew. At first, it was like the faint shiver of the earth beneath a passing cart, but with every beat of her dance, the tremors deepened. Cracks spidered through the packed dirt of the square, spreading outward in delicate yet terrifying patterns. Cups toppled from tables, gourds rolled across the ground, and children clutched at their mothers as the ground quivered beneath them. Still she danced. Her rhythm was no longer just movement, it was defiance made flesh, rebellion given form. The energy built around her, swirling through the air, lifting her dress and tangling her hair in unseen currents. The drums tried to keep pace but faltered, the drummers' hands trembling as they realized that her dance commanded its own rhythm, greater than theirs. She was no longer following their mockery, she was leading, and the earth itself was her partner. Gasps rose from the crowd as they stumbled back, faces pale in the torchlight. No longer did they see a lowly barefoot girl. Before them stood something untamed, something they could not define or diminish. She stamped her heel and the ground cracked wider, dust erupting in clouds. Another spin and the tremors surged, shaking the poles that held the festival lights. Chickens scattered in panic, goats bleated, and even the trees seemed to shiver with her rhythm. Her face was radiant now, not sorrowful, not ashamed, but filled with fierce joy. Every step was a declaration that her bond with the earth was her strength, not her disgrace. She was not lowly. She was chosen. The villagers shielded their eyes as the dust thickened, as the glow of the torches wavered in the quake. Some dropped to their knees in fear, whispering prayers, while others tried to flee but found the ground shifting beneath them, throwing them off balance. She spun faster, her movements no longer bound by the ridicule of her people. Her dance became a storm, her body moving with fluid precision, each motion summoning deeper cracks, louder rumbles. The air itself seemed to pulse with energy, vibrating with the rhythm of her power. When she leapt, the earth leapt with her. When she landed, the ground groaned like a mighty beast beneath her. At last, with one final resounding stomp, she came to a halt. The earth quaked violently, knocking villagers to the ground. The festival drums toppled, the lantern poles collapsed, and silence fell except for the trembling echoes that rippled outward like the dying heartbeat of a great drum. She stood tall at the center of the ruined square, her chest heaving, her eyes blazing. Around her, the people lay sprawled, their mocking laughter silenced forever. They looked at her now not as a girl to be ridiculed, but as a force too vast to comprehend. She had transformed their festival of scorn into a moment of reckoning. And though fear filled their eyes, a deeper truth had been awakened within their hearts. The barefoot girl was no longer theirs to mock. She belonged to the earth, and the earth belonged to her. The earth had always been her silent companion, listening to the press of her feet, absorbing her sorrow when no one else would. But now, in the middle of the festival square, it was no longer silent. It groaned and split beneath her as if it, too, had grown tired of enduring the scorn hurled at her. What began as thin cracks spreading like threads across the dirt suddenly widened, tearing open with thunderous force. The ground shuddered violently, and the villagers' screams rose higher than the drums had ever dared. Huts that had stood for generations began to wobble as if struck by invisible hands. Roofs of straw caved in, walls of clay split apart, and possessions spilled into the gaping mouths of the earth. Pots shattered, baskets tumbled, and fires leapt into sparks as stones crumbled into the widening fissures. Men who once jeered at her stumbled to their knees, scrambling to steady themselves, while women clutched their children close, their faces pale with terror. Goats bleated and tore at their ropes, chickens scattered in frantic flurries, and dogs howled as though they, too, could sense the wrath rising from the soil. But the girl kept dancing. Her bare feet struck the ground with unrelenting rhythm, as if her movements had become the heartbeat of the world itself. She no longer appeared human to those who watched her. Her figure was wreathed in dust and trembling light, her hair whipping around her face like dark flames. The more she moved, the wider the earth split, until the very square they stood upon resembled a spider's web of broken soil, each crack groaning open with the sound of mountains tearing apart. The crowd scattered in every direction, yet there was no safety. Fissures yawned beneath their feet, forcing them back toward the center where she moved. The ground seemed alive, shifting, rearranging itself, following her rhythm as though enslaved by her will. A family screamed as their home slid into a widening crevice, swallowed whole in a single moment of fury. The villagers could only watch helplessly, their helplessness mirroring the helplessness they had once forced upon her. The humiliation they had fed her was returning now as terror, multiplied 100-fold. The girl spun, her arms lifted like wings, and the earth responded with a deafening crack. A section of the square broke apart entirely, collapsing into a gaping pit that belched dust and smoke. Those standing too close shrieked as they fell to their knees, clawing at the edges to escape the pull of the earth that sought to devour them. The laughter that had once filled this place was gone, replaced by cries for mercy. Yet the girl's face showed no hesitation, no softness, only the fierce, wild joy of a soul finally unchained. The lanterns that had lit the festival were gone now, toppled into the abyss or extinguished by falling dust. Darkness mingled with firelight as torches rolled into broken cracks, flames hissing before being smothered. Shadows danced madly across the wreckage, making her seem taller, larger, more powerful than she had ever been. To the villagers' eyes, she was no longer simply a barefoot girl. She was an embodiment of the earth itself, unstoppable, merciless, eternal. Homes collapsed in succession, each fall punctuated by her pounding steps. The soil shifted like waves in a storm, throwing people off their feet, tossing them against walls and each other. Even the bravest among them, the men who had once mocked her most cruelly, now shouted in broken voices, calling on ancestors, calling on spirits, calling on anything that could save them from what they themselves had unleashed through their cruelty. Yet none came. There was only her dance. Each step drove them further into despair. Each stomp of her heel reminded them of the shame they had made her endure. Now they felt it, not as quiet pain hidden behind a smile, but as roaring devastation that tore through their village. Dust clogged their throats, tears streaked through the grime on their cheeks, and still the ground cracked wider. The earth had no pity, and neither did she. When she leapt into the air and landed with the force of her entire being, the ground split in a line that ran straight through the village square, dividing it in two. The crowd scattered to either side of the widening chasm, the pit between them swallowing everything that had once united them: the drums, the tables, the laughter, the illusion of their power over her. The village itself was no longer whole, just as she had never been whole under their cruelty. The girl's body glistened with sweat, her breath sharp, yet her dance did not falter. If anything, it grew stronger, as though the destruction only fed her more energy. Her rhythm could not be contained. It pulsed outward beyond the square, shaking the far-off fields, rattling the hills, even sending tremors through the trees at the edge of the village. Birds burst from their nests in terrified flocks, the sky darkening with their frantic wings. By now the villagers understood. Her dance could not be stopped. She was no longer one of them, nor bound by their rules. She was something greater, something that demanded fear and reverence. And in their hearts, terror settled like a permanent scar. Their homes could be rebuilt, their belongings replaced, but the memory of that night, the night the barefoot girl split the earth beneath her feet, would never leave them. She danced on, unbroken, unstoppable, while the village crumbled around her. The dust hung thick in the air, coating the villagers' mouths and throats with bitterness. The ground had split wide, homes had collapsed, and the festival square was unrecognizable. Yet amidst the chaos, a strange order revealed itself. As the barefoot girl danced with unwavering power, the earth itself seemed to choose its victims. Those who had jeered, mocked, and called her unworthy found no escape. Wherever they stumbled, the ground yawned beneath them, dragging them to their knees. Cracks opened directly under their feet, pits swallowed them whole, and heavy beams of fallen huts crushed their shoulders and backs. Their cries rose in unison, piercing the night like a chorus of guilt finally confessed. Meanwhile, the innocent, the children who had once clapped for her, the elders who had only watched in silence, the mothers who had never spoken a word against her, stood trembling but untouched. Though the ground shook beneath their toes, it never split at their feet. Though huts fell around them, none collapsed on their heads. Even the falling torches seemed to veer away from them, sparing their clothes from flame. They huddled together, wide-eyed, recognizing that the chaos was not chaos at all, but judgment. It was a terrifying justice, and it was exact. No mistake was made, no life claimed without reason. A man who had once led the mocking chants fell to his knees as the earth opened beneath him, the crack winding like a snake straight toward his chest. He clawed at the dirt, screaming for help, but none dared approach. The pit swallowed him, his voice fading into the shadows. Another, a woman who had spat at the girl and called her cursed, ran in blind panic across the square, only for the soil to crumble beneath her steps. Her body plunged down, vanishing into the hungry earth. Each fall was not random but deliberate. The ground sought out those who had raised their voices against the barefoot girl, those who had laughed when she had wept, those who had pointed fingers and poured shame upon her. They were marked, and the earth did not relent until it had claimed them. The villagers watching could not deny it. There was no accident here. This was judgment written into the soil itself. The spared ones stood frozen, trembling as their neighbors vanished into the abyss. Mothers pressed their children's faces into their skirts, whispering desperate prayers, but their prayers soon turned into silence. They realized prayers were not needed. The innocent were already shielded. The earth seemed to know their hearts. The spared felt no pride in this protection, only awe, only dread, only the cold understanding that they were witnessing a power beyond comprehension. The barefoot girl's dance slowed now, but it did not stop. Her steps no longer split the ground wide, but the tremors still pulsed, marking the rhythm of justice. The dust around her seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight, forming a haze that separated her from all others. She did not look at those who survived, nor at those who perished. Her eyes were fixed forward, her face neither smiling nor weeping. To her this was not vengeance. It was balance. The surviving villagers began to whisper her name with reverence, as if even speaking too loudly might bring the earth's fury back upon them. They realized now why she had always been barefoot. She was not lowly. She was not poor in spirit. She was bound to the earth in a way none of them could ever understand, and their mockery had not only been cruelty, it had been sacrilege. They had laughed at something sacred, and the earth had answered. When the last of the guilty fell and the cries of terror faded into silence, the village itself seemed to exhale. The tremors stopped. The air stilled. The ground no longer cracked beneath trembling feet. But the scars of the judgment remained. Great fissures stretched across the square, broken huts leaned like weary elders, and the dust still hovered in the moonlight, a reminder that the earth had listened and acted. Those who survived clutched one another tightly, staring at the barefoot girl with fear and reverence. She had not raised her hand against anyone, she had not spoken a word, yet the guilty had been struck down while the innocent remained unharmed. Justice had never been so clear. No elder, no chief, no warrior could deny it. They had witnessed judgment that belonged to no man but to the earth itself, channeled through her. And as she stood in the silence that followed, her chest rising and falling with the weight of her dance, none dared approach. None dared speak. For the girl they had mocked was no longer just a girl. She was the living hand of justice, unforgettable and untouchable, and her presence was now etched into the memory of the village forever. When the dust finally settled and the moonlight spilled gently across the scarred ground, the barefoot girl stood alone at the center of the devastation. Around her stretched broken homes, splintered fences, and wide fissures that split the village like wounds carved into the soil itself. The survivors huddled in silence at the edges of the square, unable to approach her, unable even to breathe too loudly. Their eyes were wide with a mixture of awe, fear, and shame, for they knew they had witnessed something no words could ever fully capture. The girl's breathing slowed. Her dance had ended, but the rhythm of her steps still seemed to echo in the air, as if the earth itself remembered her movements and repeated them in invisible pulses. For a long moment she did not look at anyone. Her gaze was on the ground, on the soil that had been her companion since the day she first learned to walk barefoot. She had not asked for this power. She had never sought vengeance. And yet, the earth had answered her sorrow, her humiliation, her tears. It had spoken on her behalf, louder and clearer than she ever could. Then without a word she turned away. No one dared follow. No one dared call her back. She walked calmly to the edge of the village, her bare feet pressing softly into the soil that no longer trembled, no longer cracked. Each step carried her farther into the darkness beyond the huts, toward the open fields lit by silver moonlight. The villagers held their breath, watching as her figure grew smaller, until at last the night swallowed her. She did not return. In the days that followed, the village tried to piece itself back together. They rebuilt fallen huts, mended fences, and filled the great cracks that scarred the earth, but none of these labors could erase the memory of what had happened. Children whispered her name in awe, repeating the tale as if it were already legend. Elders bowed their heads in shame whenever they passed the festival square, unable to shake the sight of neighbors swallowed whole by the earth's fury. Those who had once mocked her most loudly were gone, and their absence weighed heavily on the survivors. Around the fires at night the story grew. They spoke of the barefoot girl who was mocked for her humility, yet held the rhythm of the earth in her steps. They said the soil itself recognized her pain, and when her tears fell, it drank them deeply and promised justice. Her dance had been no mere movement, it was a prayer answered, a warning carved into the bones of the land. Parents began teaching their children never to laugh at the weak, never to scorn the humble, and never to mock what they could not understand. Respect the barefoot, they said, for the earth walks with them. Festivals were quieter after that, stripped of cruelty and jeering. Whenever music played, people remembered her, how her steps had cracked the ground, how her silence had become the voice of judgment. The girl herself was never seen again. Some claimed she walked into the wilderness and became one with the earth, her spirit now bound to the soil beneath every village. Others swore they had glimpsed her figure at night, dancing barefoot in the distance, the moonlight wrapping around her like a cloak. Hunters told of hearing faint rhythms beneath their feet in lonely forests, as though the ground itself carried her heartbeat. And when the earth trembled with small quakes, many whispered it was her spirit reminding them that justice never sleeps. Her story spread beyond her own people. Travelers carried the tale to distant lands, where it grew with each retelling. In one village they said she could call mountains to bend. In another that rivers changed course when she wept. But at the heart of every version remained the same warning: cruelty to the innocent will never go unanswered, for even the earth itself may rise to defend them. Generations passed, but the lesson endured. In moments of envy or scorn, mothers would scold their children by whispering, "Do not mock, lest the barefoot girl return." Farmers crossing their fields would sometimes remove their shoes, pressing their feet directly into the soil as if to honor her memory. And when festivals were held, dancers would begin barefoot, striking the ground lightly, remembering her steps and offering respect to the earth beneath them. The girl became more than a memory. She became a symbol. To the poor, she was proof that dignity could never be stripped away. To the mocked, she was comfort that justice might one day rise. To the cruel, she was a shadow at the edge of their laughter, a reminder that no deed went unseen. And to all, she was legend, the barefoot dancer who cracked the ground with her pain and turned it into power. And so the earth itself carried her story. With every tremor, with every shifting stone, with every beat of a drum against the soil, her name lingered. The barefoot girl had vanished into the night, but her presence had not disappeared. She lived on as a legend, eternal and untouchable, a reminder woven into the very bones of the land. Never mock the innocent, for even the earth may rise in their defense.